Hello and welcome to IndieViews episode 9. I am your host Connell Suter, and on IndieViews we speak to incredible indies about their upcoming and early access games. Today we've got a fantastic interview for you as we're speaking to Cole Jefferies of ColePowered Games about his incredible game Shadows of Doubt. Shadows of Doubt is an amazing procedurally generated voxel-based investigative game that utilizes player-driven and AI-driven events to create a genuine indie immersive sim. I'm a huge fan of this game and was super excited to get to speak to Cole about it. Shadows of Doubt manages to capture the innovation of indie with the scale of a game that feels like it's from a larger studio, all while just being a huge amount of fun to play. In the game, you play a detective tasked with solving various crimes around the city, which you're able to pick, choose, dismiss, however you want, really make it your own playthrough. If you're anything like me and you're a fan of investigative fiction, you will definitely want to check out Shadows of Doubt. The thing about it for me that sets it apart is how well it handles the immersive sim genre, with genuine and extensive player freedom in pretty much every aspect of the game, which for me really sets it apart. Seriously, do check this game out if it sounds interesting, as there's plenty in the early access already. In the interview, we talk about every aspect of the game, including the inspiration, design, early access, and future. Cole was fantastic to speak to, and we're hugely humbled that he was able to join us for the interview. So, without any further ado, let's get chatting to Cole. So, I am joined here today by Cole Jefferies, founder, director, developer at ColePowered Games. Cole, how's it going?
Hi there. Yeah, I'm really good, thanks. Yeah.
Fantastic stuff. And of course, we're here to talk today about Shadows of Doubt, which is a incredibly cool, immersive sandbox detective game that I've been loving playing it for the last few weeks, and was super excited to get to speak to Cole. So it's going to be, to any listeners, it'll be a very excitable episode, I'm sure. And apologies to Cole and to everyone listening that I will be very over the top the whole time. So I guess to start us off, Cole, could you give us a little bit of background on yourself and ColePowered Games?
Yeah, sure. So, ColePowered Games is basically like a vehicle for my kind of game development adventures. It started in about 2011, I think. So quite a while ago now, but I started out making games for mobile, mostly iOS, and I made quite a few little ones. You know, it was kind of like the big thing at the time was all these apps and games for mobile. So it was I was quite lucky in that I got to start out with like a viable kind of like market, I guess, because things are so competitive now in the mobile space, but yeah, at the time it was just kind of starting out. So yeah, that's kind of how I started out, and I started kind of learning and releasing stuff and knowing what it kind of takes to see a game through from the initial stages to a launch, all self-published. So yeah, that's very much where it started, and yeah, it's been a bit of a natural progression to kind of get where I am today, really. Like the project slowly grew in size over the years, grew in ambition a bit as well. But yeah, that's the story of ColePowered, and yeah, here I am today, still making games. So I'm very happy to be able to do that.
Oh, that's awesome! That's so cool that you started off on mobile. I didn't realize that. Because I've been looking at your previous game, Concrete Jungle, which is super cool as well. I love a lot of the ideas of it, and I'm not a huge city builder guy, but then I really like deck building games, so found that as like a perfect middle point kind of between the two for me.
Oh yeah. I'm really proud of Concrete Jungle. It's the game that enabled me to make Shadows of Doubt, really, because it did kind of just about well enough to like self-fund the development through like the awkward kind of hatching process of Shadows, where I was prototyping and trying out loads of ideas. But no, I really like Concrete Jungle, and that in itself is like it's a bit of a sequel to my very first game, which was called Mega City, which released on iOS in 2011. But yeah, it's basically a puzzly kind of deck buildy kind of kind of, I mean, it definitely looks like a city builder, but it doesn't really play like a traditional one. It's a bit of a hard one to categorize, but I'd say it's kind of SimCity meets Tetris meets like some kind of deck building game like Dominion or Slay the Spire, I guess. So, but yeah, it's an odd one, but I'm very proud of it.
Oh, you should be, man, totally. And all the best games are hard to put into categories, right? Or hard to compare to others. So that's sick. I actually didn't realize that it was kind of a spiritual sequel to a previous game. That's awesome. And especially like, you always hear that about with indies, right? It's like if you get to your second game, that's like a massive success. Like it's better than 99% of indies. So to actually have had 3, I mean, and as well as the other iOS games, that's sick. It's very impressive.
Yeah, there's a lot of games in that mix that weren't successful. Like I feel like everyone who's been making games for this long also has a lot of failures under their belt. That's just part of the process. So
totally.
Yeah, lots of games that didn't do well, but you live and learn. It's been really good though. I've been very lucky to be able to do that. I think with the timing of things.
That's awesome. That's very cool. I'm glad there was so much success from them, because it has led us to Shadows of Doubt, which is, as I said at the top of the show, an incredibly exciting and really, really cool game. So I guess to give us that intro to the game for any listeners who haven't seen it yet, could you give us a little bit of background on the inspiration for Shadows of Doubt? I believe the board game inspiration as well. And kind of the development so far.
Yeah, so board game inspiration of Shadows of Doubt was a game called Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, which I think they've kind of revived a bit in the last kind of five or so years by bringing out kind of some new add-ons. But it's a really cool game where it's kind of like one of those old kind of choose your own adventure things where you're presented with a mystery and you're basically given like a little city directory, like a map of London, and like a kind of a directory and a big book of like places you can go, and like you kind of go there and you read the little snippet of text and then you kind of piece together the clues. So I kind of was playing that and I was just like, oh, it'd be really cool to have like a video game version of this, but you could actually make it so you could go anywhere. Like you could use the power of like the digital kind of game world to like simulate so much extra stuff. Because I always found like occasionally, not too often, but occasionally in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, you would want to go somewhere, but you would kind of look up the place in the book and there wouldn't be like a text entry because the designers have obviously like not quite anticipated you would go that far off track. Like sometimes they'd be like, oh yeah, okay, I'm not like on it here. Like I've gone off on a bit of a tangent and it's I haven't followed what they were anticipating, but it would be cool if a game could kind of enable that to kind of go into my kind of the era of my kind of detective ways and see that through. So that was the board game inspiration behind Shadows, along with a host of kind of like actual kind of digital games. Like I love immersive sims like Deus Ex and Thief and things like that, the kind of old school ones. But yeah, there's so many inspirations behind Shadows, but that's a key one for sure, the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective.
That's awesome. I really love that. I love the because I totally get you in terms of, I've not played that game. I think I will because it sounds right up my street. But totally the kind of, I've had it with D&D, even making, like I love detective stories and making D&D detective stories, and that same exact problem where even as the DM, the players take a clue in a way you just never expected and went completely in this different direction, and suddenly you're trying to think of a house. You're almost procedurally generating an entire other plot line in your head from the other campaigns you've done. So that's super cool. I really like that. And I guess there's a lot of jokes about in Britain, people love murder mystery generally, and the bizarre thing that any time during the day you can pretty much find a channel showing Midsummer Murders or Lovejoy or something like this.
For sure.
So it all naturally fits. That's super cool. That's really that's awesome. And I guess like you're saying about that freedom of being able to go to anywhere that the clues kind of lead you. Player freedom generally is such a core aspect of Shadows of Doubt, and something that I think it really is noticeable from the moment you start playing it. Even if you're going through the tutorial case, it still is like, oh wow, I can kind of go anywhere here. I can take this in any direction I want. So was it just that board game inspiration that made you want to make it like such a free and open game, or was that something you always wanted to do with the game?
Yeah, it's been really interesting actually. So Shadows of Doubt actually started is more of like a detective management game. Kind of very different how it is today. Like it was originally like so you had an overhead perspective, and you still had the core concept of like all these citizens kind of going about their daily lives in the city, but the kind of the game as I saw it back then was like, oh, you're kind of managing detectives and you're telling them to go here and there, and you're kind of you've still got the overall case and stuff, but and I think that would make a really cool game. But at the time, I was just like, I've put so much effort into like simulation, but it feels like the player's like so far away from it. So it kind of all changed one day when I put a first-person camera in the game, because it was all kind of in 3D, like a very rudimentary 3D, but everything existed in 3D. So one day I just thought, yeah, I wonder what would happen if you could just walk around this world. And then the game kind of started to take shape from there, and it felt. I tried to kind of not write too much out in like a game design document at the start, because I feel like if I can, the way to design a game is to just kind of feel out the right decisions as you go, almost to kind of try and make the process feel a bit more natural. That's part of the reason why it took so long, was because I was kind of trying all these ideas. But as soon as I did that, put the first-person camera in, it felt very kind of, I don't know, the player felt very grounded in the world. And then I was like, okay, this should be a game where you're kind of living in the world as much as all these simulated citizens are. And kind of the player can almost do kind of almost everything the citizens can. And it just kind of felt like the kind of the idea of kind of freedom. It could be quite powerful to have that quite central, because it allows the player to kind of really immerse themselves in the world. So I guess, yeah, it's a mixture. I did set out to create like a game with a lot of freedom, but it was definitely kind of found its way as soon as I put that first-person camera into the game.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I mean, I love the sound of it. It's always that funny thing you hear, detective management game, and I'm like, oh wow, I want to play that. And I'm like, wait, no, we got Shadows of Doubt from this. It's all good.
I know. I think it would have been a really cool game as well. Like, but I think it's just not quite what I set out. Like it's what I set out to do, and it's. But I think someone could really take that and run with it. It would just, yeah, it just didn't work out that way for this project, but certainly still something I would play as well, for sure.
Totally. Well, the Shadows of Doubt mobile spin-off. I can't wait for the management sim. That's super cool, though. Like, I really, I think that you're absolutely right, which is that like the freedom of being a detective is an incredibly free role to be in. You kind of have to be, and I don't think that there's many games that get that across. Really, I think a lot of detective games you find, as cool as they are much more linear and like expected. So that like being dropped in and it really feeling like a sandbox, as is in the description, is like really, really impressive, and it's immediately noticeable. And I think it's a really cool addition, like, because I totally get you about like the management game does sound really cool, but the fact that putting it in first person, and I'm not surprised it was like immediately immersive, because both the atmosphere of the game and the interesting thing about the art that we'll talk more about later on is just really pulls you in. And I feel that when I think of immersive sims at this point, they almost always have to come from like AAA studios, because they're like Deus Ex level of world or map size or choices in a story. So it's super cool to get to play one that's an indie one, but also that really does feel so immersive. And you find yourself doing things for the sake of doing them, as opposed to it even necessarily being a gameplay thing. Like I'm walking past a bookshop and I'm like, oh, I'll walk in and walk around or go into this cafe and stuff. It's so immersive, it makes you want to do those things. So really awesome. And we've touched on it there, but obviously the main thrust of the game is investigation and being an investigator. So I believe that like the cases, the way you structure them is that they are procedurally built, put together, and you can take these from job boards around the game, as well as you get them from being nearby. Certainly when a murder happens, for instance, you'll be alerted and you go chasing after these people. They all feel fantastic. I've kind of amazed with like how good some of these cases have been, where I'm like, wow, no one made this, but it feels like such a crafted story. So like, how do you approach building those systems, both, I guess, the cases and the clues, to create overall cases that have a great flow to them, but really feel intentional?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think the key really is it became pretty obvious right away that we weren't really going to be able to compete with like the linear kind of detective, kind of more novel approach where you have like a twisting storyline for the twists and turns. Like, you can't really do that with all our systems. It's about the systems really interacting with each other and the AI kind of driving that. And I think the secret really, or what I think is the key to success with a game like this, is to make the kind of mundane kind of avenues of investigation exciting somehow, and having them simulated kind of does that. There's a certain joy or a certain magic that kind of happens when you kind of realize something in the game has happened as a consequence of the game kind of interacting with itself, or the two AI interacting with themselves, or kind of something circumstantial has happened. So kind of emergent gameplay, I guess, is the term that's frequently kind of called. But there's a real kind of, it injects so much kind of like, I don't know, it's hard to describe. It's like a joy that's like, oh yeah, this is just happening on my game, and it's a result of this, or it could even be as a result of something I did a few moments ago, or a few hours ago even. And it's I think it's about building around that core kind of bit of excitement, really. So we don't have like a lot of kind of avenues of narrative that can branch off, but we have like a lot of things that can just like, oh, this murder had just happened to be in this place at the right time, or this person happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now they're like chasing this other person because they saw something suspicious, and then they're on CCTV, and like, oh yeah, and it kind of snowballs into this kind of like opera of just weird consequential things that happened in the world. And it's about enabling that as much as possible, I think.
That's awesome. I love the term, an opera of consequential things. That's such a cool, but it does. It kind of captures the whole like the show of it. Like it is. I think that's a really fun aspect of it. It's like even kind of writing the questions and stuff, and thinking about the game, and like thinking of it as player driven, which it feels very player driven, but then also that, as you say, it's so AI driven as well. And I think it's like the way those two things combine is what makes it feel so like real, I guess, and so immersive.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
And not something I think, when I think of immersive sims as well, I mean, they're amazing games that you think of, but I think of them, they are very player driven. There's very few that I feel manage to get this full AI drive going as well, which is part of the nature of the way maybe they're more linear and things like this, but
yeah, for sure. I don't tend to like feeling special in games when I'm playing them. I don't really want to be the person who's like outbalanced all the NPCs. I like being kind of like a nobody, if you like.
Totally.
I do it because it gives more meaning to your actions. It's like, oh, I managed to do this, even though I've got the same abilities as everyone else in this world. I've managed to do something interesting or fun.
Absolutely. You're absolutely preaching at the choir. It's funny because that's a conversation that came up this weekend with Baldur's Gate, that, not to give any spoilers to any listeners that haven't played it, but you are in that game as the main characters. You have something about you that makes you very special. And we were saying the weekend that it almost takes away from it. We wish that we could nominate one person from the party to be the special one and the rest can just tag along. And it's funny because you talk about emergent gameplay, and it's hard. I mean, it's maybe unfair. You're talking about this is a game that came out, I guess, when ColePowered was being founded back in 2011. But emergent gameplay, I remember being a very popular term when Skyrim came out with their Radiant system. And looking back at that, I think one of the biggest complaints about Skyrim is you're the Dragonborn, and people would much rather be the friend of the Dragonborn. But also that the emergent gameplay that you get through that is very direct. It doesn't feel like it's evolving. It's not reacting in any way to kind of multiple things you're doing. It's very much based on their systems that were more straightforward perhaps than Todd Howard made it clear, but that was all games back then. But I think it's just such an interesting comparison because the emergentness in Shadows of Doubt is so natural. And it's super impressive. I almost feel like it evolves the concept of emerging gameplay for me. to really feel like true simulation, which is just, again, incredibly impressive, which feels like most will be my overall review of the game.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is, seriously. So with Shadows of Doubt, with each playthrough, there'll be this serial killer who's terrorizing the city. I've been lucky enough not to be murdered or run into them yet, but what made you want to have like a serial killer as a major part of the game in each playthrough?
So it's basically we wanted to add a lot of peril, and there's a kind of thing in games where if you have kind of an AI and they're kind of on your side, like maybe like the companions in Skyrim is a good example, actually. Like, you kind of want to look after them. I mean, not everyone does. Sometimes not everyone does. But there's this thing where, like, if you're kind of teamed up with an AI, I mean, this is an ancient reference nowadays, but I remember the kind of the Barney guards back in the original Half-Life. They would follow you around, but you kind of feel a bit devastated when they finally die on you, and you just kind of want to keep them alive as long as possible. So it's kind of like the idea that there's a citizen that going around killing other citizens in your city. You feel a bit protective over the city, and you kind of want to do your best to like stop that from happening, and like kind of almost preserve your potential future encounters with the other citizens. So it's kind of born out of that. We're kind of playing on that a little bit. We're kind of introducing an element of peril in there. Someone who you have to catch, who's going around kind of knocking the population down and kind of messing around with that. So it's something we're really excited about, and something that I'm pretty excited about kind of expanding a bit as we kind of continue the early access journey. But yeah, it is kind of like, it gives the game a focal point. Like it kind of is the ultimate detective kind of adversary, isn't it? Like a serial killer. So it felt like a natural fit.
That's awesome. Yeah, no doubt. It's so true what you're saying. I always remember back to Halo 3, whenever I'd lose a Marine, particularly Australian Marine, I'd almost restart from checkpoints just to get them back.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. And totally, I think like I guess it goes partially back to the Sherlock board game as well. But obviously, Sherlock always needs Moriarty, and all the great detectives have their counter. So totally.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's always the thing I wished a Poirot. I used to watch a lot of Poirot when I was younger. I always wish he had like an arch nemesis. There was a couple of people who came up, but not enough.
Yeah, I agree.
No, it's sick. Yeah, I'm really excited to see more of that. And yeah, definitely excited to see how that grows throughout the early access. Super fun. And I guess actually to anyone listening now, when they hear early access title and they're not sure how much is kind of in the game or is it fully playable, especially we've had instances like Baldur's Gate again, but where you've got early access that you almost kind of want to avoid. I would say with Shadows of Doubt, early access is like fantastic already. It's definitely one where I have had completely full enjoyable experiences just from what's in the game at the moment. So it's definitely one to kind of don't hesitate with the early access. Jump in as soon as you want. And so let's talk about the look of the game, because it is an incredible looking game. I think it's one of these there's not that many games that have came out in the last couple of years for me where I saw a video of them and was instantly enthralled just by the look of it before even getting to the gameplay and really wanting to just see that for myself. So I believe you use voxels in the game to create the art of it. So kind of what led to you guys using that?
That was an interesting one because, I was kind of, quite early in the game, in the prototyping phase, I was kind of, what I tend to do around then, when I've kind of got an idea and I'm looking to develop it into like, I'm kind of searching the way to like, how am I practically going to make this game? So I'm kind of looking for a workflow, if you like. I'm looking for a way to make this happen. And I was, this is a quite ambitious game. I'm kind of a team of one right now, and I'm would later go on to sign with a publisher and get a bit more funding. But it's still been a very low budget game. And it's like, kind of how can I make this happen? Well, I was looking into all these techniques. I could have it 2D if I did a top-down thing, or I could do like a low-fidelity look. And then someone in my co-working space was working with voxels, and I was like, oh, I love the look of that. Like it was, yeah, it was really like a great looking game. It's actually someone who worked on Industries of Titan, if you're familiar with the look of that, it's like a top down kind of strategy kind of thing. And then I was like, oh, that looks fantastic. So I was like, I kind of looked more into that, and it was like, okay, it's actually quite nice to build with. It's a little bit like building with Lego. You're kind of literally using squares to make a model, and then you can kind of light it with the modern kind of game engines and modern tech, and it looks really cool. So yeah, it was kind of born about just through experimentation and trying those things, and then it was a good fit because we can turn around lots of props and stuff really fast because it's quite a simple process to build with, and it was just so it was kind of driven by practicality, but also like okay, yeah, we kind of like this look. It's kind of cool. It's kind of gives it a bit of it allows you to kind of fill in the blanks with your brain a bit because it's kind of low fidelity. But also it's we can have all this cool lighting and stuff going on to give it the real kind of gritty noir kind of punch as well. So yeah, it's kind of like the game design. It was kind of a bit of a journey and a bit of a natural progression.
Oh, that's sick. And totally, it really does get that noir feeling across so well. And I think it works like perfectly for an investigation game as well, because it has that wonderful mix of like a very strong aesthetic, and it looks great, it feels great to be in, but also it's kind of you can tell what you can interact with when you're in a space, when you're going into an office trying to steal the employee details. You can kind of almost build a plan in your head by even just standing and looking through the window and seeing the different elements. And I guess the art style helps make that clear. So yeah, that's fantastic. It's super cool though that it kind of just naturally emerged. It feels so intentional. That's great. The co-working space, that's a really cool thing. They're really awesome to hear about. Just because indies, you often hear about being like super siloed, especially with the pandemic. Everyone's just working on their own. That's really cool. Do you still work in the co-working space now?
Yeah. So I used to. I'm based in Bristol, and we used to have we've got like quite a nice game dev community down here, and we used to have like a shared office space called the Bristol Games Hub. Sadly, it didn't really kind of survive the pandemic, but we still have the community, so I'm still in touch with everyone who was there. But it was a great time. It's just nice to hang out with fellow game developers in the same office. So that was really good, because before that I was kind of just on my own, working from home. And I felt quite disconnected from any kind of community. So it was really good. I'm not like super talkative or social, but it's something really nice about working in an office around other people as opposed to just being kind of in your bedroom all the time. And I work in a different co-working space today. It's slightly different, but I still get the same kind of benefits, if you like. I like working among other people. So. It was really good, and it really helped the game because you could bounce ideas off people and you kind of get to know people kind of naturally. But I'd recommend it for anyone.
That's awesome. That's really, really cool. And totally, I can really see the benefit of it. I think a few years ago I just said, why? But that's because I worked in an office with 200 people. But now, working from home last few years, I'm like, oh yeah, other people? That does sound all right. That's cool. And no doubt, because especially it's just like, I remember, even I used to do web dev. And doing web dev on your own, even, and the errors that we encounter in web dev are nothing compared to the things that you'll encounter doing proper games programming. And even just having people around to come and look at a bug, even if they don't provide the answer, you just don't feel quite so alone in the struggle against it. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really, really beneficial actually. Like, I didn't really realize how good it was, but yeah, looking back, it's like, oh yeah, it's real nice.
No, that's sick. That's really, really cool. I'd love to see more of that being set up in other places. We had we chatted until last week to an indie in Edinburgh, and the funny thing with Scotland is that like all the game devs on the East Coast and pretty much every indie seems to be in Dundee, and they were saying that they have had so much pressure from other indies being like, come up to Dundee, the water's warm, it's great. And it does make you realize that you're like a lot of these kind of smaller, like single city indie communities are really important, and probably one of the reasons that Glasgow doesn't maybe have quite as good an indie scene as it could have, which is maybe an understatement in some ways, is because it kind of hasn't built that community to start with. So I'd love to see more of that.
Yeah. I had some friends who moved up to Dundee shortly before the pandemic, but yeah, absolutely. I think it's it's just nice to have a collection of like-minded people in one place. But yeah, it's tricky actually nowadays because the market's kind of changed a bit. Things are consolidated slightly into you don't see many kind of people starting out on their own or one person or very, very small teams, because it's such a competitive market nowadays that people seem to consolidate it a little bit into like kind of small to medium-sized teams. So I think one of the reasons the Bristol one closed down is there just wasn't enough kind of individuals looking for a space like that. It was more like small teams who were kind of a little bit too big for a space like that, who kind of moved out into their own offices. So yeah, unfortunately, I think the state of the market doesn't allow for that as much as it did, say, 5 years ago, which is a bit of a shame. But you know, there's nothing to be done about it. It's just kind of the way of things.
Totally, yeah, definitely, yeah. Exactly, you could end up being just old man shouts at cloud with this kind of stuff. You just have to grin and bear it in a lot of ways. Would you say, it's just interesting because you've got that perspective on mobile as well as indie. Do you think that the mobile and indie dev scenes and space has kind of gone on a similar trajectory of competitiveness, or do you feel that one's maybe outpaced the other?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I tend to only follow like what the kind of side of the industry I'm in. So I've been focusing on more on Steam and stuff in the last kind of 6-7 years now, I guess it is. So I've kind of lost touch with the mobile market in general, but kind of my kind of view of it is that things kind of get saturated because, you know, it's I'm very lucky to be able to do this, but it's you know, it means a lot of other people want to do it too, and there's a lot of competition, and naturally things get saturated. So it's things get tougher to break into, and I think if I was starting out where I started out, but starting out like now, I'd find it much tougher. And I'm not sure I'd be able to do what I do and kind of make games on my own, essentially, or with a small team of like kind of freelancers or people dedicated to kind of helping out on specific areas and stuff like that. I don't think I could do it in today's market. I think it's an incredibly challenging thing. Yeah, I guess it's the way it is.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's yeah. That's all you can say is the way it is, for sure, because it's just, as you say, it's natural progression, I guess, unfortunately. Yeah. It is super interesting. I think for the indie space, I mean, I was not working in the games industry back then, but I remember the way the indies were able to stand out. It felt like, you know, when you think about like FTL and Hotline Miami and games like this, you still see indies standing out, but even the ones that stand out, they're standing out amongst a much more crowded group, that the standout ones are still flooded by others, in comparison to before.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's real tough to stand out nowadays. Not because there's a lack of quality games, it's because there's so many, right? Like, totally. Where do you even spend your time nowadays? There's so many things that are kind of really cool. Like, I don't have enough hours in my day to check out all the games I want to play nowadays. It's really kind of good that we're getting so much quality content, but it's also a struggle because it's like, how are you going to fund this? You need eyeballs, you need people buying it and playing it, and all these things. So it's an interesting landscape nowadays.
Definitely. I could talk about it for ages, about AAA indie, the innovation argument, and then it's super interesting, especially where it feels like so much industry flipped in terms of, like, I just don't know that many people that are that excited about many AAA games now.
No, not really.
And then B tier kind of hollowed out, and now everyone's excited about indie games, and then everyone, you know, certain indie games people play are so excited for, and then they complain it's not long enough, and you go, well, yes, but this team wasn't 600 people working on the next Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, that's the dilemma, isn't it? Like, you. Personally, I love to do ambitious projects, but at the same time, I just know where I can put enough manpower to compete with a AAA title. It's just you can't just throw money at things either. Like it's if you want something to be special, you kind of want to keep it kind of, I don't know what's the word. You kind of want to keep it concise in a weird way as well. So yeah, it's a really tricky balance. Managing expectations like that as well is it's a whole other conversation. But it's how do you kind of pull off something that. Yeah, a lot of people want ambitious games, they want ambitious scale to go with it.
Totally.
So yeah, how do you do that as an indie? It can be quite tricky.
Definitely, I think it's what a lot of people misunderstood about some of the conversation with. I keep bringing up Baldur's Gate, but obviously been playing a lot of it. With the interesting conversation with devs saying kind of don't expect this from every dev, and a lot of people misconstruing quite what that means, but that largely that's kind of what they mean is it's like the scale of it is just like most people can't do that, and not many devs even could get away with like having an early access that gets delayed for 2 years and still have a positive sentiment at the end of it. So
absolutely. I mean, personally, I'm quite happy to play much shorter games. Like nowadays, I already struggle for time to find, as I said earlier, like I want to make games, but then I also want to play them. And that's kind of, there's only so much time in the day. So personally, I'm quite happy to play shorter, smaller scope games because it means I can play more different ones. But I know there are a lot of people out there who really like getting their value from games and like having a game they can really like, that'll last them like a month or 2 months even. And they kind of never get the kind of concept of never getting bored of this because there's just so much there. But there's kind of a ceiling there, especially in indie.
Totally. That's what I love about Shadows of Doubt. I've played, I think maybe 10 hours of it on shared across tutorial and then another playthrough. And there is no end in sight for me in terms of like, there's so much to do in it, but also you get like, it manages for me to do both things. I have played on the tutorial and had a very complete experience just from that. I've done a couple of cases. In the middle of a case, I've been interrupted by a murder, and it's taken me a while to sort it. And that's felt so complete as an experience that I could play that 3 hours and go, cool, that's all I needed. But then I've kept going, and there's so much more to it. And it feels like endless content. So it feels like you've managed to craft something that kind of satisfies both angles, obviously excluding people who just want every game to be Baldur's Gate. But I think you've done such an amazing job kind of covering both bases in a way. Not that that's the intention, but
Thank you. Yeah, like we got the benefit of having all these kind of procedural systems kind of help us along with that. Like if it kind of goes back a little bit to what I was saying before, but if you can make the mundane interesting, you can make a nice playable chunk of gameplay out of something that's like a kind of side case, if you like, that is quite simple. So we've got that going for us. But also very aware that the nature of procedural generation means eventually people are going to see the patterns and they're going to be like, oh, well, I've seen this before. Like inevitably that's going to happen. It's just about like how much content can we put in to like mitigate this a little bit and kind of give people fresh experiences. But it's as with everything, there's a ceiling. But it's very good to hear that you're enjoying it and others are too. That means a lot.
No, totally, man. No, definitely. And I guess just like out of interest actually on that topic is like, do you have an idea for like what you expect a kind of how long a full playthrough takes a person? Or do you have an hours in mind that you aim for when thinking about it?
It can really vary a lot. Like, I mean, when I play through like the tutorial case, for example, which is actually quite long, it's almost a bit weird calling it a tutorial, we found, because it's there's so much to introduce the player to that it's really basically like we ended up I think calling it more of a chapter or referring to it as a chapter in the game because it's more of like quite a lengthy experience. But yeah, so that can vary from about 45 minutes to several hours. So you have a huge amount of variation even in that chunk of gameplay. And it really is dependent on how people want to interact with the world and how they engage with the world. Like some people kind of look at the kind of bare essentials, kind of quickly scan it and be like, okay, I'm going to do this next. Or they might even, because that section of the game has quite, it kind of points you in the right direction in most cases. And it kind of slowly lets you off the lead a little bit and kind of it's designed to kind of introduce you to making your own decisions as you play on eventually. But initially, people might be more used to just following objectives, being told what to do, and they might play through that quite quickly. Whereas others kind of grasp it from the get-go that they can kind of do anything. You don't really have to listen to what it's telling you can do. You can explore things, and you can read all the books and all the notes. And they really like to take time to like try and like parse what the game's telling them and kind of immersing themselves in the world. And then there's everything in between. So it's been really hard to actually like measure how many hours Shadows of Doubt is, even our kind of initial section of kind of introductory gameplay before it opens up into a more sandbox experience. It's really hard to put a number on that. We get people playing for like, I don't know, 5-6 hours, and we get people playing for dozens of hours and everywhere in between. So it's I haven't got a clue, to be honest with you.
That's so exciting though. Like, that's so cool. It must be awesome as well, seeing people who've played way more hours than you would have expected someone to put into a playthrough, and just being like, wow, this person loves it. Like, they will keep going. They just need more cases.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I think it's really like a great example as well of like kind of what you're saying, both about the approach to the game that people have, but also the different enjoyment people get from it is going through the Steam reviews, which I imagine is harrowing for any dev. But for Shadows of Doubt, it's really fun because quite often when you see people leaving very short reviews, slightly jokey reviews of games, they're putting like not recommended despite paying 4,000 hours or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
But I really love in Shadows of Doubt the amount of people who are like recommending it, being like, I have solved one case and I've played 15 hours because all I'm doing is stealing everyone's stuff. I'm just crawling around the city as a thief. And I love that as well, like the fact that people can really make their own fun in it that isn't being a detective.
Yeah. I remember like quite early in development, like I'd play it with Nick, who does the audio, and we'd just kind of mess around and kind of throw chairs about in the bar, and then like there was just like, oh, we should maybe make the AI react to this somehow, or acknowledge that you've done it. It's just there was very clearly a thread of like, oh, this could be really funny, and we don't have to tell any jokes, we just have to like enable that, like make the player be able to be a bit of a clown. And like you don't have to, you can play it dead serious, but the fact that you can just be an absolutely horrific detective, like really bad at their job, like just come in drunk and like you can't scan fingerprints properly because your vision's waving all over the place, and you can steal all the milk out the fridge and throw things everywhere. And it just kind of like, it's about like leaning into that fun that we kind of really kind of almost stumbled upon. We didn't really set out to make it something that's funny, but it's like, okay, if you make this world and have all these possibilities, you can make it so people can just be a funny character within this world. So we really tried to lean into that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Totally. I think that's such a cool way of finding it in a way, because I think that people talk a lot about funny games, and I think a lot of the problem is that if you set out to be funny, it's hard not to force the funny.
Yes.
So the fact that that's came naturally totally makes sense, because when you see the videos you see on YouTube and stuff, and the things people are doing, some of them it'll never occur to you to do. Even as a player, I'm like, wow, I would never have thought to be going, as you're saying, throwing chairs around the bar and things like this. That's so cool. And it's really fun as well, because, noir is such a serious genre. So many noir films are like, compared to now, I think if they were to make modern noir, they wouldn't make it in the same way, because they would try to make it a little bit more almost like easily enjoyable than a lot of those old noir films were.
Yeah.
But it feels so noir. I've walked around it with the Blade Runner soundtrack going, and just like it's fit so perfectly. Which I guess brings on is like the general sort of 1980s and I guess it's 80s aesthetic. It's incredibly immersive again in like a game that's voxel-based, so it's not like it's going for like hyper-realism. It manages to feel so natural and so immersive when you're in it. So what kind of made you want to set it in the 80s or with that theme? And then how do you feel that kind of that choice of setting / time has affected the design of the game as well?
Yeah, well, there's the obvious influences like Blade Runner aesthetically. Like there's just that's that kind of early kind of cyberpunk look as well, and there's kind of a natural kind of mix of the two, isn't there? Like they kind of fit together quite well. So that was certainly one thing. I just love all that stuff, and it's been like around. It's been big in games recently with like kind of cyberpunk and that being huge. So like, yeah, it's obvious. I'm obviously not the only one to like that aesthetic, but also like, because it's a detective game, we wanted to kind of have a world where there is some technology, but there's not enough technology there to make your job too easy. So yeah, part of it was about that, and it kind of it's that kind of decade. It's kind of more of an alternate reality. So we kind of gave ourselves the freedom to make things like kind of both sides. So it could be some technology can be much more advanced than what actually existed in the 80s, and some technology could maybe be a bit behind what we had in the 80s. So it gives us a lot of license to play around with that kind of levels of technology and stuff like that, because you've got the computers in the game are quite kind of 90s, whereas like other things are maybe even like a little bit older than the 80s. Like you've got a lot of kind of jukeboxes and gramophones and kind of older tech as well. So yeah, I've always loved that kind of the old and the new coming together a bit. So yeah, that was pretty much the reason why it's set in that particular time period.
Oh, that's super cool. Yeah, I mean, I love the look of it and the feel of it, because yeah, also as a fellow fan of Blade Runner, it definitely fits really well. And it's interesting what you're saying about comparing it to Cyberpunk and things like this, because it's again that difference of that you guys have managed to do something that Cyberpunk, through whatever reasons, didn't manage to do, which was making a world that not just felt immersive, but you kind of wanted to be in and not doing the main thing, and being able to, like we're saying, finding your own fun and it feeling very immersive. So it's incredible that you guys managed to pull that off in early access already as well, in a way that a huge AAA like Cyberpunk didn't. But also, yeah, I think that the mix of technology is super fun. So I mean, obviously, I'm like 30, so like anything that feels 90s, like my parents' old Mac from the 90s is great. You know, I love jumping at that on, playing around with the computers on it. But also the fact that you don't have like mobile phones and some of the modern technology that actually like takes away from a lot of detective stuff, I think, when people try sort of directly move concepts that were written for much older settings and putting them in the modern day. So that's super cool. Yeah, it does a perfect mix. And yeah, I think even that mix of old and new, right, feels like a perfect thing for the 80s, because you did still have that hangover from the 50s and 60s, and people still had, you know, record players and things like this in a way that they still do now, but as more of a choice now, I guess.
Yeah. It does. Yeah, it's a very conscious choice now, isn't it? It's not just like a relic from the past. It's yeah.
That's very cool. And yeah, no, it's the feel and the design of it is so cool. And definitely, like, I hadn't read anything about the inspiration behind it or anything like this, but then when I was walking around in the game and just thinking about Blade Runner, and then also like Chinatown, obviously it's a very different setting, but that same like being the gruff detective and knowing, you know, chances are nothing's going to end well. You know, it's kind of we'll make the best we can with the situation we have.
Yeah, exactly.
It's awesome. Yeah, and definitely it's you remind me of what you were saying earlier on as well about like wanting to protect people and the peril of it. And even that, you know, thinking about, there was a woman that I was helping investigate in the game who then got murdered like right at the end of the investigation. And it made me think again of Chinatown at the very end. Sorry to anyone, spoilers to anyone that's not seen it. But
yeah, you've had a while to watch it by now.
Exactly, you know. And again, it's like, wow, man, if you can like if a game can make me think of some of the most lauded detective and sort of noir films of the 20th century, like, that is impressive. It's super cool. And then I guess to talk a little bit more about the early access is now in September, we're seeing the biggest update to the game so far with the Cheats and Liars update, which is very exciting title. So could you give us a little bit of detail about what's being added? I think there's new side jobs, some buildings and interactions you've said.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, this is the first content update. We've been focusing on bugs pretty much completely right up until now, because there's a lot we're getting a lot of data in, so we're just trying to fix all those things. But this is the first time we've kind of focused on new content, and the core of it is a brand new hotel building. Like, it's a really big kind of grand hotel with a massive ballroom and a massive chandelier, and it's kind of like faded glory of like past times. So it's another kind of big kind of statement building, I guess, that you'll be able to rent out a hotel room if you want, because the only way to kind of have your own place and kind of recuperate and shower in the game right now, go to sleep in the game right now, is to buy your own place, or literally just break into someone's apartment and use their shower. but we kind of want to give that like a bit of a starting way, just to kind of build a little home base, I guess. So the hotel kind of enables that. And along with that hotel, we've got a new side mission, which is investigating an affair. So
Awesome.
that's an interesting one, because it's a side mission that's completely kind of generated off what's already there in the game, which is like the citizens will kind of have their kind of private affairs and stuff, and it's quite rare, but like you will get NPCs now posting about that, and you'll have to go and investigate, and you'll have to track down who they're sleeping with and get evidence and stuff like that. So that's the kind of new side mission we're including in there as well. And along with that, there'll be some new options to question and kind of accuse NPCs, because one of the things we've had a lot of feedback with is once you've found who you're looking for, who you think is the killer, for example, you can't actually accuse them. You just kind of arrest them, and that's it. So we want to expand the way the player can kind of interact with the NPCs. So those are the three main things that we're going to be including in our latest update, which should be arriving in September.
That's super exciting. That all sounds really cool. I love the idea of the kind of destitute PI that doesn't really have a home yet. Because I'm walking around as a homeless guy, essentially being like, oh, no one ask me where I live. There is nowhere. That's super cool. And I love the cheat stuff. Is some of that already kind of played around with in emails in the game?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. I thought so. That's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. We're expanding kind of that pool of emails as well. Like our writer's very talented, and she's been really busy kind of putting new things in there, which is really cool. So there'll be plenty of things like that to look out for.
That's awesome. And I really love that as well, like, the way that it feels in the game. Because again, it's the player freedom of it, of like when you're finding emails or records and stuff, is that I think a lot of more AAA old-fashioned immersive sims are like, exactly, like once you open the email that you need, it will tell you you've opened the email that you need, or certainly that you'll kind of be like, oh, well, this is it. It's got a code in it. I'll use this later on. Whereas I love when you're looking through the emails, and it's cool to hear that they're going to expand it, because the amount of ones where you'll read it and you go, that feels like it could be relevant. And half the time you'll save it and you'll print it out of the computer and save it on your clue board. And half the time it's not relevant at all. Actually, I'd probably say I overdo it. I'm certainly one, I over-collect, and I'll end up with horrifically untidy clue boards by the end of a case. But the fact that one of them will come back up later on, especially if it's stuff to do the cheating as well, where you can see how that could you could have that sitting on the side and that could influence a case. Super cool. That's all really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely possible in this latest update, and it's really nice to be able to design a side mission around something that's kind of already quite embedded in the NPC's behavior. It's just kind of like the epitome of what we're trying to do with the game, which is like make the everyday kind of stuff front and center, if that makes sense. Totally.
No, that's so cool. And I love the smaller cases like that as well. I really love that the game kind of captures all that, and that it's like, it's again the thing that you think about private investigators in noir or what have you, and some of them they'll almost it's someone hiring them to do a little side thing that they maybe think isn't quite up to their level of investigation, and they do it, and then they find a murder through it. But in Shadows of Doubt, you really do feel that you're kind of both having to make your money, like work your way as a PI, taking these cases of, corporate espionage or photographing people. And yet it's like, in the grand scheme, finding someone cheating isn't as important as catching a murderer, of course. But it makes it feel all more natural and all the more immersive as well. So, I totally get you about putting the more maybe mundane as well, the more standard everyday things. That's cool.
Yeah, cool. I'm excited to see what people think of it. We'll certainly be keeping an eye on all the feedback when it launches.
Awesome. Well, I will definitely have mine in there. I'll be writing, Cole, please add this. I really want a case where I have to investigate a cheated murdered.
There's so many good suggestions we get from the community. Literally, there's so many cool directions we could take things in. It's really hard to narrow it down to okay, what are we actually going to do? Because, we could spend a long time putting a lot of cool ideas in. No doubt. And again, it goes back to, even as much as there's a through line between these shows like Poirot, Lovejoy, Midsummer Murders, Sherlock, the fact that all of them have those slightly different styles, I imagine you've just got everybody picking their favorite one and going, oh, but this episode of this, wasn't this a cool case? Could we have something like this? Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. And I really love the sound of the being able to accuse characters, because it's definitely something where the first time I ran into it, I was like, oh, I assumed I was gonna have to speak to him, and then the guy started shooting me anyway, and I was like, oh, okay, actually we didn't need to talk. But I love that, as I said earlier in the show, I watched a lot of Poirot, and I always love that scene where you get everyone in the room, and they point to the one person at the other end who suddenly realizes they've been caught. It's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could make it like Poirot, but I don't know how realistically that I could do that. You gather all the NPCs and invite them around your apartment or something, and just I'd love that. I mean, it was absolutely borderline impossible to do,
no doubt.
but with the restrictions of the game. But I'd love to do it.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, don't worry. Every time you're asking for feedback, I'll be there front and center demanding it. No, awesome. Totally, though. Yeah. But I mean, this is it. It captures everything about that experience anyway. Well, yeah, so the roadmap is super exciting that you've shown for the game. Obviously, it's an early access, so it's lining up to a V1, which I believe is titled The Murder Drop. But could you just tell us a little bit about the roadmap and what you're planning?
Yeah, so we're looking for kind of roughly a year of early access, and we're really excited. We've got so many ideas from the community. It was, as I just said, it was really hard trying to choose what to actually focus our kind of our attention on. But we're really interested to kind of provide a certain degree of mod support, so we can kind of open up all these cool ideas that we've got coming in. We really want to enable people to execute them. So we've kind of shifted a bit from our original roadmap, which was kind of a little bit more kind of based on content, to providing some mod support, which should be really exciting. And also, we're going to be focusing more on kind of enhancing the murders as well. I can't talk too much about it at this point, I'm afraid, just to say kind of keep an eye on our news and our dev blog, just to kind of learn more as we progress through early access.
Awesome. Everyone should go check it out, because it's great seeing the write-ups as well. And I mean, the mod support sounds super cool. It's definitely a game that you can just so easily see, like you're saying, the amount of suggestions that people must have for it. But even just those little things, little extra shops, or one-off characters people want to put in, little Easter egg kind of things. Super exciting. And a year of early access is great. It's not too far off then that we'll kind of see a full release. That's great. That's super exciting stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Cole. It's been awesome speaking to you, and it's such a cool game. It's definitely one I feel very lucky to have got to chat about it, and very lucky genuinely to have got to play it. It's one of those games that feels like a kind of the kind of game that, when maybe generationally this also applies, because the restrictions that games had back when we were growing up, but it's one of those games that as a kid it would be the dream to be able to play and get to play something that feels like such a real world,
I think it was mine too.
Awesome.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me.
No, totally. And this is it. We'll have you back for the V1 release, I'm sure, when I'll be like, I'll have a real clue board behind me and being like, so I'm stuck on this one.
Nice. Yeah, happy to.
Awesome. Well, I'll see you then. And that was it for our interview with Cole Jefferies, creator and mastermind behind Shadows of Doubt. A huge thank you to Cole for joining us. As I mentioned in the intro and throughout the interview, I am genuinely a huge fan of this game, as I am for many of the games we cover, but I've played a lot of Shadows of Doubt. It's a really, really fantastic experience, and I would highly recommend everybody check it out who is interested whatsoever. And definitely worth checking in now with the latest Cheats and Liars update, and the plenty of other stuff coming in early access that Cole mentioned at the end of the interview. It's definitely a really exciting roadmap, and I can't wait to see what they add to the game. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you join us next time for our following interview on IndieViews.